Hi Shobhan, today we are here to discuss the recent APA progress reports released by the government. So if we see two reports released back to back in a span of less than 1 month, what does that indicate? The government has a renewed focus on APAs, or what do the reports indicate in your view?
Well, Tarun, not really. The overdrive that we see it was actually something long pending. The fourth report, which was released in the last week of August, and within 5 days we have the fifth report. It was a bit surprising. Due to COVID, these reports have been postponed, and that report in August could have covered all the 4 years till fisc 22-23. I think they chose to have a separate report for 22-23 just to showcase their success. If you see, 95 APAs were signed in financial year 22-23, and I think CBDT wanted to make a statement out of that. So the fourth report covered 3 years when the going was not good because of COVID primarily. Very few APAs were getting signed. So they kept that separate. And the fifth report was released after a few days just to give it the kind of platform that it needed. They have highlighted that this is the most successful APA year. So I think the reason for having two separate reports is just that. Now, to your question whether there's an overdrive or whether there's renewed focus, I think we have seen that trend since more than a year now, after COVID ended. CBDT is trying to make all efforts to have more APAs resolved and signed, and which is a good thing for industry and for taxpayers. But I won't read too much into these two quick successive reports as being an indication of any renewed focus.
Okay. A lot of interesting trends coming out from the report. So one of the things, like you rightly mentioned, record number of APAs filed in the last year, financial year 22-23. So approximately 200 APAs filed and about 100 signed. So that does show that there is a lot of focus both from taxpayers as well as government on the APA program, which is good to see. If we look at in a bit more detail the kind of the sectors in which the APAs have been signed, or the countries with which the APAs have been signed, it does cover all countries, which is a good thing to see. But the biggest number of APAs signed have been with the US and in the services sector. So does that in any way indicate the bilateral relationships, or does it indicate the state of the economy or the kind of cases which have been closed? What's your view on those cases which have been closed?
Right, Tarun. Before I come to that, let me just spend a little time on the numbers. 193 is a very good number of applications that have come in. The primary reason being that this was the year where the second round of renewals were being filed. So that's one reason for higher numbers. The second was during COVID, some taxpayers postponed their decision of whether to come into an APA or not, whether it was the right moment to come in. So I think those two factors have resulted in 193 applications being filed. 95 APAs getting signed, credit has to be given to CBDT. They really put all efforts into that. But if you still see as a percentage of applications being filed and APAs getting signed, it is still around 50%, whereas in fiscal 2016-17, this was as high as 88%. We had received 101 applications and we had signed 88 APAs. So as a percentage scenario, 16-17 is still far more successful than 22-23. Now, coming to your point, what do the trends reflect? I agree with you. US, we have more than 200 bilateral applications with US. US is our biggest trading partner. India is the hub of outsourcing of IT work to India, primarily from the US. So it is, I think it's truly reflective of that scenario, that you have more APAs with USA and you have more APAs in the services sector. Even if you look at the services sector, primarily you would see BPOs and software development. These are the two major areas in which APAs are getting concluded. So yes, the Indian APA program and the APA numbers do reflect the reality of how important US is to India as a business partner, as a trading partner, and how services dominate the Indian economy.
Right. And yes, to your point, I think that is why the backlog has been increasing. The number of applications is going up and signing is also going up, but not in the same ratio, and that is why the backlog is increasing. In terms of if we see around the world, there is an increased audit activity which is happening, probably because of revenue pressures on various authorities post the pandemic. So does that indicate a trend towards more of bilateral APAs and maps? And this is the first time we've seen a report from the government which covers map statistics as well. So does that in any way indicate the future trend is going to be more focused on bilateral APAs and maps, as also noted in the report itself?
Yeah, so a few things in this question, Tarun. So, this trend of having more bilaterals had started a couple of years back. Every year we are seeing the percentage of BAPAs as compared to unilateral APAs going up. And the two major reasons. One is the Indian unilateral APA program really puts the taxpayer in a difficult situation at times. The negotiations go, a bit against the taxpayer's interest or what the taxpayer would have ideally liked. In a bilateral APA, as you know, the taxpayers get the support of the treaty partner, the Indian treaty partner, and the negotiations happen where the outcomes are more reasonable. That's one reason. The other, of course, you pointed out, because of increased audit activity around the world, a bilateral APA looks to be a sure shot against any TP disputes. Because even if we conclude a unilateral APA in India, there's no guarantee that the other country will not question that transaction or that pricing. So yes, and in fact, if you look at the latest year, almost 45% of the applications are bilateral.
Right.
So that day is not far off, and I think the overall APA scenario in India would be where BAPAs will be more than 50%, which I think is a good trend. Coming to your point about inclusion of MAP, I was a bit surprised. These are APA annual reports. If the government really wanted to showcase their performance in MAP, they could have come out with a separate report. Putting it as a 2-page chapter in an APA report did not look very ingenious to me. Secondly, if they decided to do that, they could have done a little more analysis. They have just shown that these are our opening inventory of MAP cases. This is how many we have resolved and how many have been added. And the thrust is to say that more MAP cases are being resolved than getting added, which is perhaps to showcase that India is more efficient in resolving MAP. But there are 2 points we need to keep in mind. One is India is still far away from the gold standard of 24 months. Every treaty says that the endeavor should be to resolve MAP in 24 months. India takes far more. The second point is, which I think many people have not noticed, when the MAP guidance was issued by India in 2020, India for the first time emphatically stated that if the ITAT passes an order, the Indian C will not negotiate that MAP. So a large number of MAP cases which were in the inventory actually had an ITAT order already sitting there. So those cases were reviewed and they were all closed. So when Indian government says that we are closing more than what is being added, we need to keep this in mind that many of these closures are nothing but ITAT orders,
So it's
which
not
does
really
not which does not stop litigation.
It's not really a closure in that sense. Okay. But I guess the way I look at it, the good part is it shows focus and tilt towards bilateral proceedings rather than unilateral, whether it is BAPAs or MAPs. So that's the good message from there. Coming to let's say other issues, whether it is attribution of profits to permanent establishments or it is the traditional AMP or the marketing intangibles issue. What's your thought on how APAs have been effective in resolving these kind of issues? Your insights would be good to hear.
We have seen successful negotiation of unilateral and bilateral APAs on the MP issue. The only thing that the Indian government insists is that taxpayers have to in some manner mention in their applications that this is an international transaction, because that's the whole dispute. So once a taxpayer agrees, at least for the APA period of 5 years, that this is an international transaction, CBDT has managed to find solutions. Sometimes they have put a cap on how much could be the MP spend. Sometimes they have tried to trade it off against this brand royalty which is paid out from India. So various ways and means have been found by CBDT and the Indian CA to find a solution for AMP under the APA program. Unfortunately, that has not percolated into our MAP inventory. All the AMP cases of MAP are still pending. Initially, it was pending because the treaty partners were not willing to accept those as international transactions. But there was a time when US and UK did agree that we will treat them as international transactions. Let us find solutions. But for some reason, we have not seen successful MAP completions on the AMP issue. If you come to the PE issue, under the MAP, we have large number of profit attribution and PE issues pending and waiting for resolution for years. Again, it has been a problem area. All the successes in MAP cases have been on transfer pricing. Non-transfer pricing cases are pending for years. In APAs also, unfortunately, there has been a flip-flop. Initially, CBDT made it very clear that a taxpayer who accepts that it has a PE in India can come into the APA program, will answer the attribution question for the taxpayer. Midway, after a few years of the APA program, CBDT took a position that, PE cases cannot be resolved under APA. This was perhaps because of the position which India took in OECD, that profit attribution needs to be seen differently from transfer pricing. Then the law was amended in 2020. Hopes were, raised everywhere that now PE cases will resolve, but the going has been very slow. Recently, we heard one PE attribution case getting resolved under APA. So we hope that CBDT, having amended the law, would take more proactive measures to find solutions to profit attribution cases under the APA program.
Right, and like you rightly said, since the law covers it, eventually it has to be taken as part of APA that yes, PE attribution can be resolved because that's part of law. So hopefully that should be resolved by the CBDT soon. And also, if you look at Pillar 2 is coming in, various countries are enacting the provisions. India would also soon do that. So one of the important conditions in the Pillar 2 is that all intercompany transactions have to be at arm's length. So therefore, do you see an interplay between Pillar 2, the requirement to have transactions at arm's length with bilateral APAs coming into play to say that we should be looking at more cases going for bilateral APAs so that transactions can be shown to be at arm's length for Pillar 2 purpose? Do you see that as a trend going forward?
Yeah, Tarun, I would agree with you because, suppose all the other parameters of Pillar 2 are fulfilled, but somebody or some country questions the arm's length nature of those transactions, then all the benefits of certainty under Pillar 2 will be taken away.
Right.
So I think many MNEs would carefully look at the transactions, and wherever they feel there's a risk of they getting questioned on the arm's length nature of the transactions, they would ideally look for bilateral APAs. In fact, there will be multiple bilateral APAs because the transactions are across jurisdictions. Every MNE might be looking at least 5-6 bilateral APAs between different countries, so that their Pillar 2 solution attains some kind of permanence.
Right.
Otherwise, they would always be in the throes of uncertainty.
Right. So overall, it seems APAs and MAPs would be alternative dispute resolution or avoidance mechanism going forward, be it because of global developments or the focus in India for those mechanisms. So that's what the key message comes out from both the reports, it seems.
It is, Tarun, because India does not have ICAP or joint audits. So far more emphasis and far more importance has to be laid upon APAs and MAPs. I think India is doing very well. The progress can be seen. And hopefully with this trend of more bilateral APAs, taxpayers will get all-round certainty instead of looking at unilateral APAs and a partial certainty in India.
Great. Thank you so much, Sobhan.
Thank you.